I just want to put Carney and the Liberals to the side here, just as you personally.
Of course you do.
Does this say anything about your leadership? Have you maybe reflected on your leadership style moving forward?
No, my plan is to continue to lead and be the only leader in the country that's fighting for an affordable Canada, where our people who work hard can afford a home and food. That is my agenda.
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre faced some questions this week. His first time since one of his MPs announced he was quitting politics eventually, and another defected to the Liberals, blaming Poilievre's leadership. At that same press conference, when asked about the state of his leadership and the unity of his caucus, Poilievre turned the table on the reporters, criticizing them for a lack of coverage on apparent divisions in the Liberal caucus and for some corrections in the coverage of recent events.
I know that there will be wall-to-wall coverage on CTV of this turmoil, of a Liberal MP criticizing his own budget days before the vote. I know you're camped outside his office right now, waiting to get comment from him. I know you've been chasing Mark Carney down hallways to find out what he has to say. Are you with CBC, by the way?
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, okay, right.
I'm just curious if you think that that could lead to more MPs leaving your caucus, and what you think he means by that.
Well, first of all, CBC has had to correct the falsehoods that they put into that story. So I encourage you to tell Canadians about the falsehoods you published and explain why you did that.
Okay, our party insiders are here to unpack what's been a pretty busy week. Greg McEachern is a former Liberal ministerial advisor. Fred Delory is a former Conservative campaign manager. And Melanie Richer is a former communications director for the NDP. It's good to have you all here in studio before we end up in this election on Monday. Fred, let's start with what we just heard there from Pierre Poilievre. That felt like a clip from 2024, not 2025. What did you make of the response he had to everything when he finally spoke?
It was interesting. The very first question that he was asked about, adjusting your leadership style, you can never say yes to that I've been wrong and I'm going to shift. No leader can do that. But what we've seen, the aggressiveness afterwards was quite something, and I think it is back to 2024. It is kind of, some may say it's a wrong turn. Some will say he's got his mojo back. I remain to be convinced it's the right approach, but it's interesting. What worked for him then? He was super aggressive against Trudeau. He was hammering him all that time. He went way up in the polls, and it was working in so many ways. Ultimately, we lost the last election, though. Conservatives have. A lot of us been saying we need to do some reflection, figure out what is the path forward. It looks to me, I think quite clearly actually to all of us, they figured out the path is more of the same. It's going to be exactly what we've seen before. He is not going to change. He is going to hope, I'd say, maintain that 41-42% vote he has and hope that the Liberals just can't keep that themselves. There is a big risk in that, but I think that's the strategy that they're going with.
On your first point, why can't you as a leader say, I've got some things to think about here? Why can't you?
That immediately shows weakness. The people who are your supporters will feel betrayed by it. Anyone who does that, at any party does that, there'll be blood in the water. He has a leadership review in 2 months' time or less than that. You just can't take those risks. You've got to hold strong. It doesn't mean you have to not change, but you can't go out there and say, yeah, I have to make some changes to how I lead.
Right. Go ahead.
I don't know about that. I think if it relates to, is your leadership under question? Why does everybody think you suck? Blah, blah, blah. I think you're right that you can't really say, oh, yeah, there's room to change here. But I do think at least regular folks see good leadership when you're like, you know what, I'm going to hear what my caucus has to say and maybe we'll make some adjustments. I think that there is folks like that humility. I think we've seen Premier Ford, not as it relates to his leadership, but we've seen him say more than once, yeah, I made a mistake, I'm going to correct and do things differently. I do think people have a lot of capacity and a lot of...
a little humility goes a long way. Yeah. And I think anyone that would answer that question and say, look, am I perfect? Are there things I can improve? Yes, and I think that would have done him a world of good, because if you're following politics closely, in the summer when he was in a by-election, the spin was he was going to change his tone, and that didn't really happen. I mean, the only, we should thank our lucky stars that there was an apple spittle with that answer, because it reminds me of, you said 2024, David, absolutely, but I think there's some echoes there for people that are watching of Trump on Air Force One, or when he does, and when he starts picking out where do you work and why are you in, you work at you're a bad person, you work at a bad place. And I think a lot of Canadians, if they saw that clip, they don't recognize the voice. They know the person's just there doing their job. Why are you so defensive? Why are you so flinty? Why are you so petty? And I don't understand, if that seems like a path to winning his leadership review in a very, very safe, leadership review in Alberta in January, that does not seem like somebody who's ready to present themselves back to Canadians.
Fred, I mean, what do you think of that? I mean, to me, it's Pierre Poilievre being who Pierre Poilievre is. You know what I mean? Like the endless amounts of columns and conversations about, oh, will he pivot? Will he change? The guy is who the guy is. And I don't say it as a criticism, but like, you're not going to get different because this is just who you're dealing with.
We always say you need to be authentic in politics.
He's very authentic, yeah.
Is that what we say?
Yes.
Yeah, he's
Authentic in losing or authentic in winning?
He's aggressive in how he goes and communicates. And I'm not saying I agree with it or agree with his approach. I do think it would have been a mistake, though, if he answered that first question about your leadership style, if it should be adjusted. He is a leader of a party. He's got strong control at the caucus. I know there's been some issues, but ultimately, most of the caucus, the vast majority is with him, as well as the membership. I wouldn't tinker with that or risk it.
Well, Mel and Fred's point, though, that it's that 41% that he talked about. It's very clear Mr. Poilievre has raised the floor of the Conservative Party. But has he also lowered its ceiling and given himself a band of potential victory, but it's a narrow one, even though he starts from a high base?
I think so, and I also don't know that those numbers are super solid, right? Like, I think those numbers are based on the Conservative Party. I don't necessarily think they're based on Pierre Poilievre, and the reason I say that is because we keep seeing Pierre Poilievre's numbers, or favorables and unfavorables, go down, and I think the more people see him, that reasonable center who doesn't know where to park their vote, the less they like him. And I feel like the reflection coming out of the last election should have been, how do we sharpen that, or how do we take a look at that and fix things? And instead, the inclination seems to be, well, no, this is working, we're going to lean in and do more of it. And again, I've said before, like, I don't know how the nonpartisan people in my universe who typically choose between, orange or blue, can look at blue and say, yeah, Pierre Poilievre is somebody that I'd park my vote with. I think everybody in that universe is saying, no, I can't
Mel
vote for this
says,
person.
you say reflection, and Fred has said many times, and I've heard this from other Conservatives, there's not been any reflection on why they lost. And so it seems that Pierre has decided to be Pierre, and they're going to run that again, but we don't know why they didn't win. They don't know why they didn't win. You've said this many times.
Well,
I've heard,
we don't know if they've had reflection. I don't know exactly what they looked at. I've called for, post-mortem, a truly well done one. I don't know if they've done it. They may not have shared the results from it.
Right.
If they believe they can hold the vote that they got, and that if Carney and the circumstances change in the next election, where Mr. Elbows Up, big expectations, doesn't have a lot to show for after this last parliament in the government, and if the NDP just rise a little bit, the math changes. Like, there was only 20-some seats difference between the Liberals and the Conservatives. I'm not saying that's the right approach. I'm saying that's their approach.
Right.
They're looking at a repeat of the last election, which is a dangerous thing to assume.
Right.
I think what I would have advocated for if I was doing this is do what Stephen Harper did in 2005. Go to ground and figure out why you weren't elected and make those adjustments.
But there's a lot of evidence out there, Fred, that a lot of the Conservative base, and particularly younger Conservatives, this is what they want. You know what I mean? Like, they're not asking him to change. It's people who are maybe Conservative voters or definitely not Conservative voters saying he should change. The people who are all in, they like it, and they don't want it to go.
That's a big part of the challenge he has, is he has this new coalition within the Conservative movement that is made up of people that never voted Conservative or never voted before. And he's got to find that way to keep them motivated and fired up. And they like that stuff, by the sounds of it.
Okay, well, one area that may get them motivated is coming Monday in the House of Commons. We've got this key budget vote in the House on Monday, and who knows? One, the government seems to know, it doesn't seem to know if it has the numbers on it. Have a listen to this.
I look at what political parties say in public. The Conservatives don't support the budget. The Bloc Québécois doesn't support the budget. And the NDP doesn't support the budget. So simple math would tell you that the budget, if that's true, will have a rough time on Monday.
We think that there's a number of colleagues across the aisle that must be doing a bit of soul searching. It's not a time for political games. This is not a time for posturing. This is a time to fight for Canada. Fight together, meet the moment, elevate yourself above politics.
Okay, that's the Liberals today. The Conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre, was asked today if all Conservative MPs will vote against the budget. Here's part of that exchange.
Are you confident that all of your MPs will vote against the budget?
100% of our MPs oppose the costly Carney credit card budget that is going to drive up the cost of food, housing, and living for Canadians. What all Conservatives stand for is an affordable budget so Canadians can have an affordable life.
Okay, Greg, there's nuance in a lot of things. McKinnon talking about what parties are saying publicly, not necessarily what they're telling him privately. And Mr. Poilievre saying 100% of MPs oppose the budget doesn't mean they're going to vote against the budget. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but what do you think we're in for on Monday?
No, Rosie caught that earlier in the show about what Steve McKinnon said about what they're saying behind closed doors. So obviously there's deals going on. And again, that's the question that Mr. Poilievre answers not. The answer is not, what was being asked there. So I don't understand why the Conservatives are so allergic to abstaining. I think if I remember correctly, in 2010, the Liberals, there was, maybe, I don't know, over 20 that abstained because Liberals are pragmatic. They probably, read the polls and the funding. So I don't understand that. When Chris D'Entremont's floor crossing was discussed, they talked about how close his election was. He wasn't the closest. There's still some other Conservative MPs. One won by 4 votes, another one by 12, another by a couple of hundred. So that there are some races there. If I'm those members of Parliament, I'm going to start to wonder. So this is, here is my question. 6 months ago yesterday, Carney's cabinet was sworn in. The budget represents their promises. The budget, it represents what Canadians said. You can govern, but it's going to be with a minority. So when the opposition parties, who lost, go to Canadians, they've caused an election. What is it about this budget that you despise so much that you are causing us to go back into an election? Today, in August, the Prime Minister promised an increase for CAF, for our armed forces to get a raise. That went through today. If you look at where the budget is scoring well, the Leger poll shows defense and infrastructure. That's going to be an argument that the opposition is going to have to make.
But there's $82 billion in new defense spending in this budget they did not run on in the last election. The 5% commitment is post-election. So that is a new thing. And there is 40,000 job cuts and unspecified program reductions that excuse me, I'm choking here, not because of what I'm talking about. That the parliamentary budget officer said today, there's no details on exactly who's going to lose their job or what program is going to go out the door. So, Mel, this is where the New Democrats come into this, right? Because a massive scaling up of defense spending and what most people say is a modest scaling down of the public service may still be too big for the 7 NDP.
Totally, but even I've pushed back a lot privately with folks that I work with in the Liberal universe this week, because this idea of we're going to go to the polls because of the opposition. Yeah. The government has spent I should correct myself. The Prime Minister and his office has spent every day since they've been elected basically telling even their own caucus that they don't need them, that they're going to do things their way, that they're going to figure things out, that they don't need to pass things through the House, they don't need to worry about committees, they've got it. So when they show up and they don't do deals with the opposition parties, that's a Liberal problem. That's not an opposition problem. And the last few months, we talked about how this budget was going to be one where we're going to rein in spending, we're going to be smart and strategic about our spending. So if the message is now convoluted with the opposition parties, again, that's a government problem. That's a Liberal problem. That's a Prime Minister problem. So this idea that, if we go to the polls, it's the opposition fault. Not the government. The government did what they did.
The opposition's going to have to explain that. David, I watched your panel with Melissa Lantsman. When you spoke to Melissa Lantsman right after the speech, one of the first things she said was the speech was too long. Right? So I'm not sure that message is going to break through to Canadians about why they're back in an election. I think and look, I will say this government, and I think that it's a bad pattern from the previous one, they rely on advocates and pundits way too much to explain their messaging and what they're trying to get out there, as opposed to the people who actually work in government, the communications people, their ministers. Right. And I will give you that there is a lot that could be sold better or could actually just be sold. You cannot rely on one person, the Prime Minister, and his popularity against Poilievre to carry this budget. There is a lot of things. I can see the difference from the election to now in terms of how much they share messaging, and that's on them.
Right, but Fred, yes, it is the government's job to win the confidence of the House, no question. But there are the various political considerations that all the other parties have to think about, right? And the dynamic that's there. And my read is, I know Greg mentioned the Liberals abstaining in the past, but they were not the official opposition, right? It's a whole different story.
In 2010, you said they ended up having their worst electoral defeat in history after that.
Right, but I was thinking of the Michael Ignatieff years. There was a lot of No.
It was them.
No,
But
yeah,
then
yeah,
They were
okay,
official
yeah.
opposition, then they got wiped out.
Sorry, yes, thank you for
Thank you for
fact-checking me. I got it wrong. But this particular official opposition, there's just no way, right? They're going to abstain en masse, maybe 1 or 2 members. And it seems the Liberals don't necessarily want an election, but they aren't afraid of one either. That would be the dynamic.
That's the funny situation we're in. There could be a case made for all 4 political parties that they can grow from this election.
Right.
They could all go backwards in certain ways, but they could all grow. The NDP could get official party status. The Bloc could grow up a bit and get more seats, and they have a provincial election with a referendum separatist party leading in the polls. Conservatives could form government. Liberals could get a majority. There's all these different variables. They all have a reason for it. End of the day, they're going to look at this budget, though, and if you're a political party, a serious party who wants to govern this country or have an impact, and you think this is a bad budget, you have to put the politics aside and say, I do not support this budget and I cannot let it pass. If you abstain in any way, you're saying, I support this budget. I'm okay with this budget passing. And any of the opposition parties who do that will have to explain themselves why they allowed this budget to pass.
And this is the thing, Mel, that with the remote voting, with the electronic voting that came in during COVID, we saw people logging into Parliament from bathroom stalls. There were bad moments during COVID.
A lot of bad.
But unless you are outside the country when you can't vote, which is what happened with Michael Chong last week, or there's massive kind of technical failure, and I guess that becomes a new parliamentary flu, there's no reason not to cast a vote other than you didn't want to right now.
Totally. And that is also communicating something, right? Whether you vote yes, you vote no, or like you've said, if you abstain, you're communicating something. And that has been, I think, a problem, particularly for my folks, are you supporting the government or are you not? That was one of the reasons that we saw Jagmeet's numbers go down, and they never really came back up despite walking away from the supply and confidence agreement. So this, are you supporting the government or are you not, is a tricky one. And I understand why there's conversations happening at the NDP and in the same frame, I understand why the Bloc wouldn't want to, do the same thing that maybe the NDP just did. For the Conservatives, I don't think that there was any path to supporting, but it'll be interesting to see if we're in an accidental election on Monday, which,
that's the thing that I know that the Liberals worry about this because of Michael Chong, I think Shannon Stubbs as well. They didn't intend to miss those votes, but putting on my old Director of Parliamentary Affairs hat, I think there's arcane rules where if you don't stay in the House until the vote is announced, that could be declared, your vote isn't counted. You don't have a backup on your computer for Zoom. You're in a place and the technology fails.
Yeah.
And, I made a joke at the end of last week about, ask Joe Clark's legislative assistant, who I think was, Nancy Jameson. They had cabinet ministers in Brussels. They had some MPs that they couldn't find. So, this is a message, to Liberal caucus members. No fooling around, get to Ottawa, be where you need to be, because, this vote, you don't want an accidental election.
Well, look, the Clark thing was pre-smartphone and all that kind of stuff, so hopefully, you couldn't text anybody, so hopefully we've found a way to move past that. But Mel, I do need to ask about the NDP, right? Because we're trying to find out what's going on, and we're being left on red, and we're being ghosted. And, you can't get a New Democrat to come on national television and talk about their thinking, which is a rare thing today. What do you think the calculation is for them? Because they've got their leadership. They don't want to be seen as sort of like a little brother to the Liberals anymore, right? And there's, as you've outlined, a lot of things they don't like in this budget necessarily.
Totally, it's not an easy position to be in right now. But like you've mentioned, you're kind of an in-between period as you're figuring out who your next leader is. So you kind of need to keep the boat afloat before that happens. And obviously, an election before that leadership race ends would not be awesome. There's also a caucus member who is running for leader. So that is also a political calculation,
right?
A leadership calculation. So then that brings you down to 6. And what does it mean for the last 6? I think some MPs have been vocal about whether or not they are supporting or not. And then others just haven't said. I think that there's, from what I understand from the party, they're still having conversations as a caucus to figure out if they can do the same thing, all of them, and they're still having those conversations. So I think it'll probably be a last-minute thing. I don't think they know yet. I think they're trying to figure out what that path forward is. And as I'm told, conversations continue.
So Greg, like the Liberals I'm talking to, it's a broad range of nervousness, right? It's like, won't be a problem, it'll be fine, versus I'm really not sure, and really worried about the accidental election possibility because of just people think there's no chance, and then suddenly you find yourself in a circumstance you can't get out of.
Well, you know, I did hear on different panels from different pundits that reporters that the government wasn't doing anything to get the budget passed. And then we found out that there was discussions with Chris D'Entremont and perhaps Matt Genereux, and then maybe as, you know, another additional, 10 people that they're having those conversations with.
Right.
I go back to what Steve McKinnon said at the beginning in that clip, where he said, this is not, they say one thing in public, something different. So, it is 2 votes. Where does Elizabeth May net out? Does somebody have a big argument? I mean, no offense to the NDP caucus, but we started off this, I think, this session where of the 7, 4 were mad at how the interim leader was, 3 were mad at the other 4. So lots of things can happen. I talked about the accidents that the government is worried about, but those accidents can happen on the opposition side. And, there were some unhappy Conservative MPs. We know that there had to be, and what's been done to them. There was a really clumsy approach to this, and there was a release the hound, so maybe perhaps people are very, very scared. But I do think that there's some conversations going on that the government has, whether by choice or just the way they things have netted out, they're not sharing.
Yeah. Well, look, it's more likely, I think, that it's the opposition who could accidentally cause the election. I'm not blaming them for it, but like the Conservatives think there's no way the Bloc are going to do it. The Bloc would think there's no way and they all just think the other person's got it, and then suddenly, boom, it goes sideways.
I think the mistake is depending on what those conversations sounds like. If the conversations are with the leaders of, the NDP and the Conservatives who don't necessarily have buy-in from everybody in their caucus, I think that's the hick. But if the leaders are, decided to vote against, and their own caucus members have had some of those conversations with the Liberals, that's the kind of the
last night you had 2 Conservative MPs tweeting about abortion. We always talk about how our parties get blamed for raising the abortion debate. You have another MP talking about Brookfield. You have another MP talking about this. I do not see the same sort of discipline that I used to see with the Conservatives. And so in terms of accidents, that is something that I would be thinking about.
So Fred, I was wondering about this. There was an interesting moment earlier today when Mr. Poilievre was taking questions from reporters. He was asked about why Matt Genereux was still in his caucus when it's been reported he met with the Prime Minister and Tom Pitfield and Braden Cayley to talk about, defection, seemingly. And he was asked, Mr. Poilievre was what he and Matt Genereux talked about when they finally spoke. He goes, that costs are too high. I'm like, I'm sure, yes. That's it. Can you believe the price of bread? That's exactly what they talked about in that first thing. But, it seems to have stabilized and settled, on your side of the aisle. And
it was a
going
break
into Monday.
week or Remembrance Veterans Week where all the MPs were back in their ridings, so we don't actually know what's going on. And I think
That's true.
when they all come back Sunday night, Monday morning, to the House and to Ottawa, I think that's when we'll, if rumblings are still there, that's when we'll hear them. But on that front, I'm not hearing anything else. At the same time, I didn't think D'Entremont was going to cross when he did, so things come up.
Right, so how do you approach that now? Coming back to Parliament, having had this happen, I mean, maybe break week, you can look at it one of 2 ways, right? That either everyone gets away, they calm down, they talk to their constituents, and they're reminded of why they're in Ottawa, or I'm out from under the thumb of the leadership. They can't find me in the hallway, and I can start doing some things. I mean, it can go in either direction, right?
It could, and it was interesting where stories were leaking last week about meetings with the Prime Minister that was going on. We're not hearing about anything like that right now, so either it's not going on or maybe the Liberals or someone's tightening up on that messaging if that's happening. It was sloppy what happened last week. Like D'Entremont, the way he told the reporter in the hallway that he was thinking of crossing. As soon as he said that out loud to a reporter, you're out of the Conservative caucus. You can't do that. So your point about Genereux still being in, that's a good question. How does that get squared, knowing that he met with these people and clearly was having conversations about leaving the party? But it seems to be, it was just those 2. There doesn't seem to be any other names. There's other MPs who we know or have heard of that are frustrated with the leadership, which is always a problem that every party has. It's not something unique to our party.
There are Liberals frustrated with the Liberal leadership.
But
right
I'm not
now,
hearing
right?
anyone considering leaving the party. I do think that has stopped, and I think we're back into the situation of how many votes will he get in the budget.
What's interesting is typically in this kind of situation, you kind of send out your team, right? You send out your team, you start talking to every member of caucus, you put your relationship on the line to have those conversations, to bring people back in, to make sure that they're happy when they're upset with the leadership. But what I found interesting about this whole process is it sounds like Jenny is having some of those conversations, which people seem to be upset with her and the leader. So how does that square off with are you bringing people back in or not? Or do you just continue to upset people? I find that fascinating as a dynamic and fascinating
Especially
to see
because
where it goes.
she was leaving, not leaving, I'm not sure.
Well, I mean, look, you lean on the people you know and trust, right, to deal with a moment of crisis, I guess, is what you do. And there's a double-edged sword to every personality in politics, right? But, I just wonder, Greg, like, what you think we're going to see next week on this, right? Like, are the Liberals still continuing to fish where the fish are to try to get people to come across, or do you think they're more catching than pitching?
I really don't know, and because I did know a couple of the the individuals that were having conversations. As you said, I think if D'Entremont had to do it all over again, he made a joke about how long he's been in politics, and to say that to a reporter, I was going into lockup. I didn't quite understand what was going on, but this government has been pretty good at keeping those conversations prior to this tight. Look, the first floor crossing rumor that I saw in print was October 23rd. So this just didn't happen. It went away for a little while and then it came back. I think iPolitics had a story on October 23rd. So this has been going on for a while. And then I will not say what Bob Fife said, but when he said what people were hearing on the doorstep, he was hearing that from candidates. And if he's talking about Alberta, more than a better chance than he's talking about Conservative MPs.
Right. Fred, last word from you. I mean, do you think I know you were writing about it on your Substack. Get ready. We're headed to an election. I hope to God you're wrong, just because of my fatigue levels right now. But what do you think happens Monday? Do you think this survives?
If all parties stay true to their values and their core, we're going to the polls.
Fred wants one so bad.
Gear up and get ready.
You really want an election, don't you?
No.
Not getting enough airtime, dude? Like, you're on everything,
Unlike stability, I'm not I'm not crazy about elections at times, but if every party is true to its word and what they believe in, then we should be going to an election.
Well, let's hope there's some less than honest people in politics, eh? And we don't know. Right? No, we'll see what happens. I mean, I honestly don't know. I think it's a possibility. I can't imagine it's a probability. But what the hell do I know? Fred was fact-checking me because I didn't know what was going on back in the old minority parliaments of the Harper era. Fred Delory, Greg McEachern, Melanie Richer, always good to see you, gang, on Friday.